A hard slap struck Maggie Hart's cheek and sparks flashed in her vision. She tasted blood but refused to cry. If she begged, they would laugh. If she fought, they would call her wicked. People circled around her in the market square, faces sharp with judgment. At the edge of the crowd, one man stood still as stone. Wade Kincaid, the richest rancher in Dry Creek Crossing, watched the hands that hurt her, not the tears she held back. Maggie tried to kill the small hope inside her, but it rose anyway. Why would a man with power risk his good name for a widow the whole town wanted to break? Her life had been shrinking ever since her husband Caleb died 6 months earlier. Maggie lived alone in a small house outside Dry Creek Crossing. Every morning she woke before the sun, washing fast and pulling on a plain dress. She pinned her dark hair tight and left her home before most folks opened their doors. The gold ring on her finger felt like a warning now, not comfort. It marked her as a widow. It marked her as someone the town whispered about. Caleb had died on their kitchen floor. The doctor said his heart failed, but people in Dry Creek Crossing believed their own stories. They said Maggie was too quiet. They said a woman only hides when she has guilt. They ignored the bruises she once covered and the nights Caleb came home angry and drunk. No one saw the moment he grabbed his chest and fell. They only saw Maggie alive afterward and decided that was enough to blame her. From then on, she learned to survive by moving like a shadow. She kept her eyes low. She used back alleys. She never answered when women muttered or when men stared too long. Some days they only bumped her shoulder. Other days they pushed her hard and told her she deserved it. That morning, Prudence Harlow stood on Maggie's doorstep wearing a fine hat and a false smile. Prudence was the woman folks listened to in church and in town meetings. She spoke soft but cut deep. She told Maggie the ladies' aid group expected her to confess her sins. Maggie said no in a quiet voice. Prudence warned that the bank had limits when it came to widows. Then she left Maggie standing alone with a cold knot in her chest. Not far away, Wade Kincaid watched the town from a small rise. He held a brass spyglass steady and followed Maggie as she walked toward the market with stiff shoulders. People stepped away from her like grief could spread. His foreman, Luis Ortega, rode up and reported talk of the bank calling her debt and men planning to teach her a lesson. Wade lowered his spyglass and said only that Luis should stay close. Late morning filled the market square with wagons and dust. Maggie chose busy hours because crowds made cruelty harder, but today eyes followed her everywhere. She paid for potatoes and beans without lifting her gaze. The farmer took her coins like they were dirty. A mother pulled her child away. Someone crossed themselves as she passed. Near the well, an old woman stumbled. A voice shouted Maggie had tripped her. It was a lie, but lies did not need proof in Dry Creek Crossing. People closed in fast. Prudence Harlow appeared at the front, speaking about duty and safety like she was quoting scripture. She slapped the basket from Maggie's hands, and food rolled across the ground. Maggie bent to pick it up, but hands grabbed her arms and shoved her into a post. The crowd tightened, hungry for more. Still, Maggie lifted her chin, because dignity was the only thing they had not taken. Then a rifle cracked across the square. Silence swept the crowd. A horse stepped through the parted bodies, hooves striking slow and steady. Wade Kincaid rode in on his bay stallion, rifle smoking in his hand. He dismounted without rush, crouched beside Maggie's spilled food, and placed each piece back into the basket as if nothing else in the world mattered. When he stood, he faced the crowd and spoke in a calm voice that carried far. He said the next hand laid on Maggie Hart would answer to him. Then he turned to Maggie and lowered his voice. He told her she could refuse what he was about to do, and he would still walk her out of danger today. Wade faced the square again and declared Maggie Hart would be his bride, and under his name she would be protected. The silence broke into whispers. Prudence Harlow's face twisted. Wade offered Maggie his arm and waited. He did not pull her. He gave her the choice in front of everyone. Maggie looked at him. A name could be a shield, but it could also be a cage. Yet the crowd behind her still held violence in their eyes. She lifted her hand, steady despite her shaking heart, and took Wade's arm. A sharp murmur rolled through the crowd. Wade helped her gather her food, then guided her through the parted bodies. No one dared step in their way now. At the sheriff's office, Wade told Sheriff Dean Carver to record the marriage. The sheriff stared, stunned, but opened the registry. Maggie spoke her name in a clear voice. Wade answered his own part without a pause. The seal pressed into the page felt like a gate closing and another opening. When they walked back outside, the town waited. Prudence tried to shame them, calling the marriage a stain on Dry Creek Crossing. Wade said a decent town did not beat women in daylight and call it righteousness. That shut most mouths. Wade lifted Maggie onto his horse, keeping a careful distance. He did not touch more than needed. They rode out under a sky wide with dust and sun. For the first time in months, the air ahead of Maggie felt open instead of closing in. Maggie had expected Wade Kincaid's ranch to feel cold and distant, but when they rode through the gate, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: safety. Even if she did not trust it yet, ranch hands stopped what they were doing to stare. Some tipped their hats, some only watched with quiet surprise. At the porch, a tall woman with gray hair and a sharp gaze waited, hands on her hips. Wade introduced her as Mrs. Dobbs, the housekeeper. Mrs. Dobbs looked Maggie over with a measuring eye, then nodded once, letting Maggie step inside as if passing judgment only she understood. The house smelled of warm bread and clean soap. It startled Maggie. She had almost forgotten what a peaceful home could feel like. Mrs. Dobbs led her to a bright room in the east wing, with fresh linens on the bed. At the foot sat a familiar trunk. Maggie froze. It was hers. Luis appeared in the doorway, tipping his hat. He said he rode back for her things while she was at the sheriff's office. Maggie's eyes filled before she could stop them. Mrs. Dobbs softened only a little and said fear takes time to leave the body, like she had spoken those words before. That night, Wade kept his distance at supper. He spoke gently, asked nothing of her, and made no claim beyond respect. But danger had not ended just because they left the town behind. A knock came after dark. Luis stepped in with a damp paper in his hand, taken from the ranch gate. On it was a warning. Maggie read the threat. It promised they would drag her back to the square and force her to confess to a crime she never committed. Her hands trembled. Wade's jaw tightened hard enough to show the muscle in his cheek. He told her plainly that tomorrow they would ride into Dry Creek Crossing in full daylight. Morning came sharp and cold. Dust rose under their horses' hooves as they rode toward town. People stopped and stared. Some women whispered behind gloved hands. Men lowered their hats out of uneasy respect for Wade. Maggie kept her shoulders square. She walked beside him not as a prisoner, but as a message the town could not ignore. Prudence Harlow stepped onto the boardwalk in her best dress and gave a smile coated in sugar. She spoke of peace and righteousness, saying Maggie could end all this trouble by confessing. Maggie answered with a steadiness she barely felt. She said she would not confess to lies. Prudence's eyes hardened, and for a moment Maggie saw something she had missed before. Fear, not of Maggie, of truth. Wade did not waste words. He told the crowd the next hand raised against Maggie would answer to him. His voice cut clean through the muttering. Then he guided her into the bank. Inside smelled of ink and dust. Mr. Miller shook as he confessed the bank had been pressured to seize her home. Wade laid a document on the counter, proof the debt was paid in full. Maggie stepped closer and asked that her name be cleared on every record. Mr. Miller nodded quickly, almost relieved to set things right. The stamp thudded down. One chain was cut. But hate did not break that easily. When they stepped outside, a man shouted she was cursed. Another called her a witch. Maggie felt her breath catch, but she did not step back. Wade moved to the center of the square and said every man who harmed his wife would lose work on his land before sundown. Then he stepped aside so Maggie could speak if she chose. She did. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied as she spoke of nights. Caleb came home drunk, of bruises she covered, of the lies that spread like fire. She said she was done sneaking through alleys like a thief. If they wanted to accuse her, they could bring proof and speak it in daylight. The square fell silent. Shame hung in the air thicker than dust. On the ride back, Wade told Maggie something he had never spoken aloud. His first wife, Hannah, had once been blamed for sickness spreading through town. People whispered she had brought it. Wade believed staying silent would protect her. It only gave cruelty more room. Maggie listened. She understood too well. Night brought a chilling reminder of how far cruelty would go. Louise found a rag soaked in lamp oil near the barn and a lantern shattered in the grass. A single spark could have burned the horses alive. Someone had come in the dark. Someone bold enough to cross Wade Kincaid's land. Wade tightened security. Men guarded the barn. Gates stayed locked. Maggie felt the walls of fear press close again. But this time, she refused to be helpless. In the stables, she soothed a wild black mare with a calm hand. Wade watched her with quiet respect. He said animals knew which hands asked and which hands demanded. Maggie felt the truth of it in her chest. Trouble found them again the next day. A rider delivered a small parcel to the ranch gate. Inside were dead weeds tied with twine and a note promising judgment. Maggie's stomach turned cold. Wade tore the note into shreds and let the wind swallow it. That afternoon, Wade rode into town on business. Maggie promised not to leave the yard, but worry tugged at her like a thread she could not cut. Sorting through her trunk, she found Caleb's old coat. She touched the seam, and a folded letter slipped out. Thick paper. Neat writing. A wax seal shaped like a small cross. Her heart pounded as she read. It spoke of Caleb's debts, of a payment offered to him, of a powder that would leave no trace, and a command. Put it in your wife's tea. Maggie sat frozen as the room turned cold around her. She thought of Caleb's last words before he died. I won't do it. She thought he meant he would not hit her again. Now she understood. When Wade returned at sundown, she met him in the hallway and placed the letter in his hands. His face hardened, and for a moment she saw a storm waiting behind his calm eyes. The town had not only hated her, someone had tried to kill her. And now there was proof. Wade read the letter again, slower this time, as if each word carved itself deeper into him. Maggie watched his face shift from confusion to cold fury. The wax seal glinted in the lamplight, the same seal Prudence Harlow used on her church papers. Maggie felt her breath shake. Someone had paid Caleb to poison her. Someone had watched her suffer for months and stayed silent. Wade folded the letter with steady hands and said they would take it to Sheriff Carver at sunrise, and call the county marshal from Red Bluff. His voice was calm, but the storm behind it was clear. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Maggie paced her room, unable to sleep. Every sound made her nerves jump. The wind whistled through the cottonwoods, and their branches tapped the roof like warning fingers. She sat on the edge of her bed and tried to breathe slow. Then she heard it. A soft creak outside the back porch. Maggie opened her door and peeked out. Wade was already in the hall, rifle in hand, eyes focused on the dark. Louise stepped out of his room with a pistol, and Mrs. Dobbs held a lantern with her palm, covering most of the light. Another step sounded outside, slow and careful. Someone was on the porch. Wade moved to the door without speaking. Maggie followed, because fear no longer forced her to hide. Wade raised one finger to his lips, then eased the latch open. The porch boards creaked under the weight of a crouched figure. Maggie saw the man's hands first, dragging a rag soaked in lamp oil along the wooden rail. A shattered lantern lay nearby. It would take only one spark to set the whole house in flames. Wade lunged. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against a post. Louise yanked the intruder's arms behind him. The man struggled until Wade pressed the rifle barrel under his jaw. Moonlight revealed his face. Cal Hensley. A loud drunk from town, a man who laughed at cruelty. Wade spoke low. Who sent you? Cal muttered. he was teaching the widow a lesson. Wade pressed harder. Cal panicked. He said Prudence Harlow paid him and promised protection. He said Prudence claimed the town needed cleansing, and Maggie was the cause of its troubles. Maggie stepped forward, voice steady. She asked why the town hated her enough to kill her. Cal's answer was simple and cruel. Maggie was quiet, alone, and easy to blame. People liked sins they could point at. Louise tied Cal's wrists and dragged him inside. Maggie watched Cal tremble with fear. She remembered trembling too, months ago, while the town watched with cold eyes. Now someone else shook under truth. Wade vowed Cal would see justice in daylight. Cal begged to run. Wade refused. Before dawn they rode into Dry Creek Crossing. Frost sparkled on the grass, and their breaths puffed white in the cold air. Maggie's stomach twisted as the town came into view, but she sat, tall. Cal slumped in his saddle, Louise gripping the rope tied to his wrists. Wade rode on Maggie's other side, silent but strong. Sheriff Dean Carver listened to Cal's confession with a stunned look. When Maggie handed him the letter with the church seal, the sheriff swallowed hard. He asked Maggie to tell everything, from the night of Caleb's death to the moment Wade stopped the crowd in the square. Writing each word down, he looked older than he had the day before. Then he sent a rider for the county marshal. By noon, Marshal Amos Crowley arrived covered in dust. He did not waste time. He read the letter, questioned Cal, and asked Maggie to speak her truth. When she finished, the marshal nodded once. That was enough. He asked where Prudence Harlow was. The sheriff said she held her ladies' aid meeting in the church hall. The marshal said, "We arrest her in broad daylight. Let the whole town witness the truth." A crowd followed them as they walked across town. Maggie felt her pulse in her throat, but she did not break stride. Prudence's voice drifted out as they reached the hall, sweet and false. When Prudence saw Maggie, her smile collapsed. "What is that woman doing here?" Maggie lifted the letter so everyone could see. The marshal stepped forward and announced that Prudence Harlow was under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. Gasps rippled through the room. Prudence tried to speak of righteousness, but her eyes darted toward the side door. She planned to run. Maggie stepped in front of her. Prudence's hand shot into her pocket. Wade was faster. He grabbed her wrist and twisted until a small glass vial dropped to the floor. Poison. The same poison meant for Maggie's tea. The marshal cuffed Prudence as the hall erupted in whispers. Some women backed away from her like stepping from a fire. Prudence hissed at Maggie that she should have died the night Caleb fell, but no one sided with her now. The county judge arrived 2 days later. The hearing room overflowed with townsfolk. The judge listened to Cal's testimony, read the letter, and held the poison vial up to the light. Prudence tried to deny everything, but the marshal repeated her own words from the day of her arrest, and her face went gray. The judge ruled Maggie innocent and ordered Prudence Harlow sent to Red Bluff for trial. Her land and goods were seized. Her voice carried no weight now. Outside, Maggie stepped into the sunlight. Some townsfolk nodded at her. Others looked ashamed. The wind felt different on her skin, softer, free. A week later, Maggie opened a small shop near the square called Heart Remedies. She mixed salves and teas the way her mother taught her. People entered slowly at first, but soon mothers came with sick children, ranch hands with swollen wrists, and tired wives needing help. Maggie offered what she could: honest work, honest care. One evening, Wade walked her home. At the porch, he asked if she regretted marrying him in that desperate moment. Maggie looked at him, then at the ranch that no longer felt like a cage. She said she did not regret it at all. She reached for his hand. He froze, surprised, then held hers gently. Maggie stepped close. Wade wrapped his arms around her, steady and warm. For the first time, she leaned into someone without fear. The prairie wind moved soft through the trees, and the night felt peaceful. Maggie Hart had survived cruelty, uncovered truth, and found more than safety. She had found a life worth living.